Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 1, Chapter 35. Sir, Bev began. No need, Bev, just show me. Side cut her off and watched, cursing under his breath as the signal count reached 30. Approximating that circumnavigation of the deactivated hyper relay was responsible for the signal sources, he then established they were being employed to map planetary space around Mustafar. But how? Yes, there were traces or hints a vessel was responsible. Still, with 20 plus warships scanning not only the immediate space, but the entirety of the system, nothing should be evading the coverage. Analyzing the data field, his mind had yielded no results either. Although possible, cloaking would require a Stygium crystal array, or something large enough to power it. Memories of Tarkin's Corvette came to mind, yet the ship had been recovered, thoroughly vetted, and not compromised. His thoughts then drifted to the conspirators in its very heist. That was years ago, Evan. Surely we would have seen the technologies employed by now, he thought idly as he ran through a mental list of all involved. Understanding dawned on him, despite the findings afterward. The talent the crew had assembled at Subterfuge would have made uploading the ship's data, encrypting what they had found, and transmitting it for dispersal on some level mere child's play. We're going to assume we are dealing with a cloaked quarry, unless certain technologies have been employed, which I am unaware of. We will then assume this quarry is utilizing a Stygium crystal array, he said after a few more moments of thought, startling more than a few of his crew members. I need a way to locate, track, and target a vessel equipped as such. To what purpose? Pritkar spoke up, adjusting his black tunic as he stood at his station. I'm sorry, Sile responded quickly. What is the purpose of deploying the signal buoys in the first place? I estimate that we are being mapped, or rather the interplanetary space around us, Side admitted. I do not believe there are sufficient source signals to expose the entirety of our operation, however. I would very much like it to remain that way. He could see sporadic teams working together to find his answers. Those not debating myriad possibilities through open dialogue were tapping away at data stations and simulators, or hammering away at personal data pads, working through complex equations, algorithms, and scenarios. 7. Please tell me your conglomerate has worked these through, Side asked into empty air, squinting his eyes and tugging at his chin again. We have, sir. I accept your assumptions are correct. Although Stygium systems are capable of evading detection, they are not inherently failsafe, requiring an abnormal amount of power to maintain the system. We calculate the vessel to be no smaller than 8,000 metric tons, roughly the size of a light cruiser. The system power requirements mentioned are being analyzed congruent with this conversation, precisely to determine the viability of tracing that component. Side considered the influx of information, screwing his face tightly and flexing his arms about him to conjure his internal analysis. Tracing the element will be priority one, he said with his eyes tightly shut. Upon location, I need solutions for disablement. Effects of attuned seismic charge? A chime rang softly through the room. Fetch, Ryanhuck. Sir, that would probably work, although the pitch and amplitude necessary may destabilize onboard systems in the wake zone of any vessel caught in the blast. Reactor cores, more specifically. A slightly distorted male voice called over the linked TACnet employed by the fleet. Wouldn't shielding prevent primary and critical systems from the wake? Another voice rang in over the same feed. Female and accented, sounded with moderately grainy electronic distortion. Theoretically, yes. However, disabling the system will require almost the full complement of the fleet. That many charges could hypothetically harm our ships more than anything we may target, if you take my meaning, Prickar spoke to answer, his face glued to the monitor before him, running simulations of the exact tactic before him. Side enjoyed the openness of free speech within his ranks. It promoted the out-of-the-box solutions that had gotten him and those under him where they were, respectively, and most assuredly this assignment. Sir, multiple casualties planetside, Bev said, standing with the muff pressed to her right ear. Unaggravated hostile action from the quarry. Is the target harmed? Side was suddenly nervous, flashing his eyes wide in immediate distress. If so, all of this becomes null and void. Bev patiently waited for the after action from the Tagada Tai. Both targets remained unharmed. Ground forces executing loose follow, providing location and vectors for the possible terminus. Both targets? Side asked, genuinely puzzled. Target 1 and, Bev paused, a Mandalorian? It was a statement, but sounded more like a question to Side. Side stared at his comm officer, waiting for more information, his hands resting anxiously on his hips. Footage from one of the trailing teams on the center monitor, Bev said, tapping a key and pointing forward. Side snapped his head forward, looking beyond and sometimes through the hollow image, watching intently as two tiny specks were racing at breakneck speed over rocky, ash-laden ground, kicking up a nightmare of dust contrails in their wake. I thought we were doing a loose follow, he uttered. Sir, a static-laced voice broadcast over the TACnet. For all intents, they are. Original Vector 2? Pritkar answered, doing his best to phrase it as a statement. Tagada Tai. Harrell, break the pattern immediately and converge on Vector 2. Hem them in. Sir, two distinct replies came from both Hung and Kag. Sir, the action was recorded at Vector 1, on secondary, Bev reported. Side switched his gaze to the monitor on the right and watched the cam footage from the original team, on whose bikes the targets were now in possession. He watched as the Togruta ignited a red lightsaber, followed closely by a white lightsaber. He watched her face, forehead turned down, eyes seemingly staring at him. He watched as she clashed the sabers, how the resultant energy arcs blinded him and distorted the recorded feed. Static-laden waves gave way to off-screen background noise. Hold, he said. The image was freezing on command. Isolate that. Blaster fire? Bev sat down quickly, running the audio only a few times through to clean up the intermittent static. With the video still paused, she fed the audio into the TACnet for all to listen to. The sound was unmistakable. Two quick blasts followed by a third. Similar trajectory on the first two, distinct power increase on the third. DLT-20? Pritkar spoke up. Continue playback, Bev, Side said, returning his finger to his chin and watching intently as the video resumed. A bright flash of white, green, and red rocked across the screen, drawing more than a few intakes of breath from those around him. As the video regained integrity, torn bits of metal were raining down in all directions, some fragments even hitting the helmet and cam of the trooper whom they had the perspective of. Seconds later, the second of the two targets came into frame, lithe form, olive skin with a vambrace over her right arm, and a T-visored helmet on, charging formidably at the cam's source. A-180? That's impossible, Pritkar said. That was an unprovoked terrorist act, he heard the second of the two troopers say as Side clamped a hand around his mouth, knowing what was coming. Anything else to add? Target 2 said. Side stopped trying to hide his surprise and understood then fully why 3 troopers, 1 pilot, and a TIE GT were dispatched in less than 7 seconds. Please let it not be, he told himself. As she trained the rifle on the last of the dismounted troopers, the skin of her left forearm lay exposed. Freeze. He closed his eyes to absolute silence and knew from the lack of color shift that his order had been carried out. Instinctively, he placed his right hand over his left forearm, feeling the circular branding under the firm fabric, then slowly opened his eyes. Sister, he said to himself, seeing exactly that there, branded into her flesh, the humanoid head, half skull, half flesh. Sir? Bev said slowly, carefully. Sir, a small voice chimed in his ear through the microbead implanted there. Side covered his mouth to reply. Go ahead. DS-1 has been destroyed, the voice replied waveringly. Side looked at Tag, slowly removing his headset and placing his hands to support his slumped head. He breathed deeply and held it there briefly before showing it out with gusto. He cast a glance around the room. All eyes were on him. She's a child of Kino. This place is a wasteland, Tsar said, explaining what Kawani was thinking. Flat expanses gave way to irregular rock formations, outcroppings, carved gullies, and treacherous natural bridges of porous volcanic stone, blanketed by thick layers of oily black and gray ash. An oppressive heat baked indiscriminately, unwavering in whom or what it touched. The constant reddish glow in black rock contrasted to perfection, making determining the time of day impossible. Night, day, what's the difference, she thought. Kawani could feel the bike beneath her rattle and backfire, soot clogging every component from intake to exhaust, she knew, casting doubt on her initial thought to keep them. This place is just flat out desolation, she thought for their benefit. Thank you, by the way. I don't know what exactly you did, but the knee feels much better. No need. As stated, your mobility affects us both. But you're welcome for what it's worth, Zar responded. Besides, it beats jabbing yourself with a stim pack, nasty things. Kawani could see sculpted geometry cresting the horizon before her, uncertain if it were the fortress or another gathering of indignant natural phenomena. Roiling clouds of incendiary smoke beside it left little doubt, however, and she idled back somewhat to allow Ahsoka to ease her bike in beside. The planet was already a cacophony of natural sound, which made verbal communication over the din exceedingly tricky. The added pitched howl of the bikes themselves made it all but impossible. She glanced back quickly to look at Ahsoka, who had taken a stretch of cloth and knowingly wrapped herself tightly about the head, leaving a slight crease from which to see. She motioned with her brake hand, 2 fingers toward her visor, and then quickly out with those same fingers toward the horizon. Ahsoka brought up a hand to her head to do her best to look past the steam, smoke, and ash toward what Kawani was pointing to, then saw it. Twin spires were breaking the horizon line, and then she too could see the fiery cloud of smoke coming from somewhere out of view. She nodded at Kawani, and they both took the bike's grips firmly and throttled them fully on cue. That was quite the display back there, Kawani. I hadn't known you capable, Zar said, breaking the almost mesmerizing trance she felt herself drifting into. The feel of the bike underneath her and the engine's whine in her ears fed the increasing hunger to rid herself of memories. That, she thought, is precisely why I am trying to forget, Zar. I am better than that. She finished the thought, envisioning the words while dodging a pair of intrusive spires, the resultant howling echo of her passing sweet music to her ears. To forget. He began again, then paused briefly. Out with it. Endeavoring to forget seems to have taken you full circle, right back into the birth of your memories, he carefully interjected. There isn't time for riddles, Zar. Speak plainly. Kawani felt herself losing patience. Why forget when you want to recall, Ani? You're fighting yourself. Every life has a purpose. That purpose gives it meaning. Without meaning, there is only chaos, and you don't subscribe to that. Be honest with yourself and admit your fears. Only then can you conquer them, he said. That rings with the tenet of the dark side, Zar. I will not revisit the past. She almost spoke the words into her ears. All that you've witnessed with this Togruta, Kawani, open your eyes. There is no dark side. There is no light side. There is only the Force. And this is all it will ever be. Ahsoka has learned this. You need to as well. Kawani ground her teeth and opened the throttle as far as it would go, anger seeping through her core. She took the bike slightly off track to dash between rock formations she hadn't needed to, cursing into the helmet, cursing Sidious, the Sith, and the Inquisitorius, cursing the Empire. What I am saying is simply this, Kawani. You have a past. Everyone does. However, you have decided to follow a different path, so do not let your past now dictate your future. She began weeping, despite her best efforts to the contrary. They made me a tool, Zar. A tool, she yelled into the helmet. Yes, they did. An exquisitely crafted tactical storm of aggressive chaos, steeped in your ability to connect with the Force. A terrible weapon, Kawani. Terrible. Why rely on anger when you're given the opportunity to turn those gifts they bestowed upon you against them? Kawani involuntarily relaxed her grip on the throttle, hearing and feeling the bike respond with the mechanical equivalent of thank you. The corners of her lips tugged slightly as she felt herself nodding in comprehension. understanding what Zar was getting at. Find my peace, she thought. Nadali used to say that all the time. Yes, exactly that. Utilize your anger instead of reacting to it. Let it become the source of your power, then unleash it. Channel it thoroughly, Zar continued. That is precisely what the Sith teach Zar. And again with the labels, Kawani, let go of your assumptions. You could just as well focus on your humor or your joy. They all have power. There is no dark side, there is no light side. There is only the Force, she thought as she closed her eyes briefly, squeezing the last tears from them as a gentle smile formed. There is only the Force, Zara repeated. There is only the Force, she agreed. Ahsoka could feel the tension emanating from Kawani in droves. Waves of regret she seemed to be out racing, yet would never be able to elude. She felt a friend's pain as few could. Tides of anger were improperly blamed, used merely to recuse her actions. Sorrow and grief, her life partners, holding her hand each day, ready to embrace her every moment of her life. These emotions would remind her through conscious and subconscious, never allowing her a minute to herself. And then you invite Zara in as well, Ahsoka thought, shaking her head, hoping a balance could be found within. Her thoughts were broken when she saw Kawani idle her bike down as they crested a slight incline of unbroken rock. They both brought their respective bikes to a halt on the precipice of a shallow canyon only 1 meter across, its base flowing with molten rock. 3 kilometers away, standing before them, was the obtuse fortress, its smooth, polished facade a stark contrast to the pockmarked and pitted stone surrounding it. A blazing inferno encircled the landing pad and surrounding area. Welcome home, Ahsoka, she said to herself. They both sat there for a long moment, saying nothing, feet planted on the ground, watching as the engulfing fire danced its savory light over the gleaming stronghold. Finally removing her helmet and tucking it under her left arm, Kawani turned to Ahsoka. I am sorry, Ahsoka. I made excuses for who I am, but that, back there, she nodded behind them, was uncalled for. Was it not? There is no need to search for absolution where there is none to be found, Ani. You did what you felt was right. My trust is in you. They are not mutually exclusive, Ahsoka said, unwrapping her head. I feel a conflict within you, though, and in there, she continued, pointing to the fortress, that will be detrimental. Any conflict, I believe, has found resolution, Ahsoka. She paused a moment, then continued. I see it now. The conversations with Master Yoda, your lightsaber. Zara drove the point home. Ahsoka felt the sincerity of the admission. How was the anger she had perceived minutes before channeling toward other endeavors cached in a sense? Ahsoka, Kawani asked, her eyes never having left Ahsoka's. Yes, Ani. You had no intention of leaving here, did you? Kawani asked outright. Ahsoka hadn't, remembering her vision with absolute clarity. She had been willing, at that time, to perceive the vision literally, to finish what had not been on Malachor. Many things have changed since, however, most importantly, herself. Initially, no, she said after careful consideration. However, things have changed. My heart has shown me there is further need for Ahsoka Tano, she finished, smiling. Kawani couldn't help but return it as her gaze turned back to that of the fortress. You don't have to do this, you know. We can leave now and find this Sabine you keep talking about. She turned back to Ahsoka with a wink. Ahsoka turned her gaze back to the stronghold and mulled that over for a few seconds. No, we. She was starting to say as she heard Kawani fire up her bike and look back at her friend. Glad to hear it. Let us announce ourselves then, Demiri Allen said, her voice electronically modulated. She had already settled the helmet home and was throttling the engine. Ahsoka watched blankly as Kawani walked the bike back a few feet, gunned the throttle, and rocketed over the small lava flow, landing with a slight lurch. Ahsoka was ready and followed suit, feeling her lurch as she sped for the contrail before her. Please consider a like and sub. It is YouTube's way of getting these to more people. I am less concerned with subs as I am with getting the story out there, and I need your help to do that. Thank you.